You know, Dr. Clark, Babies After 35. She's a TikTok. She's got millions of subscribers. This week or last week, she had posted something about how inductions aren't a bad thing. And there's a reason why we do inductions. And I commented, I said, yes. I go, if I had just had an induction, my daughter wouldn't be dead. Something like that. Those may not have been my exact words. I can't remember what my exact words were. And she commented, I'm so sorry. She asked what happened. So I sent her to discussion of birth. And then later this week, she actually posted meme, or you just click through it, where it's the different types of midwives, starting with the CNM, going all the way down to the direct lay, traditional midwife. And I was like, I even wrote like, this is a great start. Thank you. She goes, yeah, but why are you guys, why did you guys seek that alternative treatment in the first place? She goes, it's because of us, because women have been hurt by the OB/GYN community. And she goes, we have to take responsibility. So she's like, I'm trying to merge that, why we went outside of modern medicine in the first place. And then I talked to her about how, like, once we get out there, we get sucked in, and the gaslighting and the cult-like mentality.
I think a lot of us do go for alternative stuff. And I think also there's an idea in which I would like to tell her, probably, we could probably all tell her, is I think a lot of us think you can't have a natural birth in the hospital. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of people have this idea
about that too.
Yeah, of like, where we're like, we want to naturally have our babies and not take medicine. We don't want to be induced. We don't want to. Right. So I think a lot of people think there's this idea of like, if you go to the hospital, they're going to force their ideas on you. They're going to force their medicine. It's like hospital represents medicine. That's all it is. It's medicine, it's injections, it's IVs, it's interventions, as everybody calls it. So I think that's where it comes from, is a lot of us see that. And it's not always that we were wronged by somebody in the medical community. It's just that is the point of view that everybody gets. When you go to the hospital, when you go to the doctor, when you're sick. Whenever you're really sick, you go to quick cares, you go to ERs, you go to everybody that you know in your life. No one's going to the hospital when they're well. So of course, being pregnant, you're like, well, I'm well, I'm healthy. Right. I have no reason to go to the hospital. So there's where I think that's what it is. I think it's just a whole big ball of like circle of that. You know what I mean? Right.
Yeah. And she talked about that. She's like, look, if I have a mom that's refusing everything, I want to have a conversation with her because I want to respect her where she's at. She's all about giving mothers autonomy. And if she goes, you always have the right to refuse in the hospital. Like, you always have the right to refuse in a hospital. We also talked about Ricky Lake and how all the harm she's done, and how I would love to have a hard conversation with Ricky Lake because she has just spread so much lies. And we talked about that. We talked about how a lot of these people get on social media. I think she posted today about how putting a hat on a baby post-birth is bad for the baby. Like, I remember hearing that. People really believe that.
I think something that Christina said is the importance of hospital-based medical providers admitting that patients do have the right to refuse things, admitting that patients do have the right to research things. You have the right to ask questions. You have the right to have a medical provider who explains things to you. And it's like, there's another doctor who actually Dr. Clark has shared recently. She recently shared something because I found her, I actually found her from a video that she made that was about, I think it was also about inductions and why you shouldn't be listening to random TikTok birth influencers, because only your doctor and only your hospital know what is the appropriate choice for you. And you have to have communication with them about your care versus what all these birth influencers are saying on social media. And that's how I originally found her. But she shared something the other day about how, yes, everybody should be supported to deny anything that they want in a hospital, but you should be fully educated as to what the impact of denying that will be. And her post was specifically about people who are choosing to deny IV fluids, while in labor. And she even seemed very supportive of the denial of IV fluids. If you've made that choice and that's what you would like to do, then by all means deny it. But come to the hospital with realistic expectations and understand that although we don't know more about you, you are the expert in you. We know more about labor and delivery, and we know more about emergencies, and we know more about what can happen when you do deny these things. And it really did, because she was talking about how extremely difficult it is in an emergency to get an IV placed in somebody who is severely dehydrated after several hours of being in labor without IV fluids. So her thing was basically meet your doctor at the table, get the IV placed, and if you don't want the fluids, we can just let the port sit there. Keep it in your arm, keep it in your veins, so that way, if an emergency happens, we have immediate access. And that to me was, I mean, I almost hate to admit it now, but I am terrified of needles still to this day. I'm terrified of needles. I'm on my 4th pregnancy. And when I go for my blood work and stuff, I'm like shaking in the chair, and I tell the person at Quest Diagnostics, I'm like, you need to talk to me about anything. Don't tell me. I was like, I know you're supposed to show me the needle has been sterilized. I know you're supposed to tell me what you're doing. I want none of that. I don't want to talk about it. I want to look over here. I'm going to give you my arm. I'm not focusing on any of this. And my fear of needles and my desire to not be induced in a VEET for a TOLAC are a huge part, like a massive part of why I wound up choosing out of hospital birth versus hospital birth. And it was all miscommunication. It was midwives telling me the hospital just wants to induce you, which now knowing from being part of this group, hospitals don't like inducing TOLAC unless it's like very medically indicated that it's an appropriate choice. And when I wound up being transferred to the hospital, the thing that held up me being able to be put under for my C-section, the longest, was the 25, 30-year seasoned veteran nurse who couldn't get an IV in my arm because of how severely dehydrated I was. And I'm like, those are 2 huge things that no doctor had ever explained to me before.
Right.
You can say no to the fluids. Let's place the IV so that if there's an emergency, but you can have all this, like the needle still would have bothered me. I hate it to this day. Like I said to somebody in the VBAC group the other day, like without a doubt, the worst part of my planned C-section when I had my son was getting the IV.
Yeah.
Like I'm less afraid of the spinal than I am of the IV. It's just, it irks me. But having doctors like Dr. Clark and the doctor who I originally saw that post from being vocal, balanced, careful, they're walking on eggshells, but being vocal about there are ways for you to have the birth you want safely in a hospital setting and being supported by the traditional Western medicine community that really is the key to bridging the gap. Unfortunately for all of us, we know like all of our babies would still be alive if we had been trying to birth in a hospital. And it's simple, tiny, tiny, tiny things that are incredibly manageable in a hospital that make out of hospital birth so unsafe for so many babies that it really is good. It's not going to be the out of hospital midwives who bridge the gap. It's going to be the hospitals, the doctors, and the nurses. And I know, like Danielle, with the never, like we in this circle know that the never is because they simply don't want to. I like this newer trend that I've noticed has gained a lot more popularity, even just in the last year. I've noticed it increasing a lot since John died, of doctors getting on social media saying, we see you, we hear you, we're tired of taking your emergency transfers that we know we could have saved your baby's life, we could have saved your uterus, we could have saved all of this heartbreak and drama, and we're here to meet you and give you what you were missing so that we can make this a safer place for everybody.
You know, when I get those babies that are coming in that have been harmed by home birth, when I'm working, I do treat those patients, those families with ginger hands, you know, even because I completely understand where they're coming from and the trauma of that transfer. It's not just the transfer, it's everything pre-transfer that they've been fed during their process, right? Like I'm having to unpack months, years of distrust of the medical community.